I'm Ben Ward, internet person since about 1993, founder of Love Hurts, and I've created this as a campaign to promote Whitespace, although I'd like to know how many people had heard about Whitespace before coming here today. That's pretty good, that's encouraging. Day job at the moment is MLL Telecom. I'm a network architect and troublemaker, introducing drones and Whitespace and Internet of Things into a sort of mobile telecoms backhaul business, which has been interesting for me. Now, Whitespace. So imagine you're a farmer living in a croft, back end of nowhere. Your copper probably doesn't reach you from the exchange. You've tried everything you can. You get probably 200 megabits per second, if you're lucky. Sorry, megabits. Did I say megabits per second? Privileged me, hey. 200 kilobits per second, sorry. And smart city. So the smart city is a kind of an application of the Internet of Things. Rubbish bins, parking spaces, road signs, you name it. Someone's come up with a reason why it should be on the internet. And disaster zones. So this is what happened in the Asian tsunami. Not the Japanese tsunami, the Asian one. But you can imagine pretty much the same thing. That is your communications infrastructure after a tsunami. So this is actually a bigger story. It's more than just TV Whitespace. There's a fundamental change to the way you allocate spectrum. So here's the spectrum. Don't tell anyone, but this isn't the UK spectrum because no one laid it out this easy. So this is actually a representation. This is the American spectrum. There's an arrowhead there at the bottom, as you can't see, but the Wi-Fi is in two tiny bands just there, little slivers. And TV, that's the big yellow one, goes across there. Just an intro to the types of license you can get. As Steve alluded to, there's unlicensed, there's light license, and licensed. Licensed is where you'd run GSM, 3G, 4G. You pay an awful lot of money for that. Microwave links with point-to-point. And you own that for the period until Ofcom decide you don't, as far as I know. Light licensed, you rock up, you put up your link, you check with Ofcom and they say, yes, you can have it, no you can't. You pay £50 for that. So quite a drop in price from 2 billion. And unlicensed is your 2.4 and 5.4 gigahertz, like Bluetooth and Zigbee. And Wi-Fi, sorry, forgot that one. But it becomes more available. When I say available, there's less control over how you use it as you get further down. Now add to this, dynamic. So as a caveat to what Steve was saying, it is unlicensed, Whitespace, but it's actually dynamically allocated. I think that's the bigger story about Whitespace, is that instead of sitting on the spectrum for long periods, you actually hand it out to people where it's not currently used. So there's a large percentage of spectrum which isn't being used that's actually been allocated to people. The number of licensed exempt devices has outsold all licensed devices, including TVs, radios, and mobile phones. So it's not something you should ignore, unlicensed. It's not just junk spectrum, it's not just toys. It's produced a massive amount of GDP, as Vint would point out. Vint Cerf, I assume everyone here knows who Vint Cerf is. Anyone doesn't? No one admits it. Vint would open it up. That's pretty much what he'd do. Yeah, that's good enough for me. It gives you a lot of advantage because you don't have to ask for permission to do things. You can start to use it. So if we had to ask for a license for the Wi-Fi in here, well, that's why we don't have an open BTS box set up in here, because it's just not worth the hassle. But Wi-Fi, switch it on, start using it. So instead of sitting on it, you can share it. So you own it, but you share it with somebody else, and that's the dynamic spectrum access part. At the moment, it's just TV bands, but it could be extended to other bands. So microwave, I'm fairly sure LTE wouldn't be in that list, but you can let someone else use that spectrum while you don't need it, where you don't need it. More broken arrows. What is a TV whitespace? If you have a look on the gaps in this spectrum analyzer here, that's a whitespace in the TV band. This is the big gap on the right is what happens after the digital switchover. All that space is freed up. And don't get too excited, because that is probably the 700 megahertz that's being moved out of the way for 2018 for someone to buy. So what that actually does is reduces the amount of white space available in the country. So I think that's something that we should be concerned about, because it will not be unlicensed anymore. When I say we, I mean we as individuals rather than we as operators. So where are the TV white spaces? They mostly coincide with population density and a little bit of topography. So hilly areas here. The hilly areas would be fairly densely populated around Liverpool, but a lot of channels reused there. But the white spaces, in white, strangely, in the Highlands and Islands, there's an awful lot of available spectrum there. And if you look, I might have stolen this slide from BT.
Yes, you did. Thank you very much.
But it helps reinforce their message, if anything. The number of lines that are a problem due to their length increases pretty coincidentally with these areas. So that shows it's quite a handy technology to cover these outlying areas. The farmhouse with the 200 kilobits per second, for instance. So you'll need the Whitespace database, as mentioned before. I'd assume it's going to be cloud-based. It's still open to question how the database will work. I think it's still going through Ofcom consultation at the moment, and it's possible the results will be announced shortly, but it's still not clear how it will work, who will operate it. Spectrum Bridge run a Whitespace database in the US. Google claim they run a Whitespace database, although I challenge anyone to actually use it. And Fair Spectrum in Helsinki. It's a registry. It's a registry of what's already used. It's not a reservation system, as far as I can work out. You register the fact that you're using it, but you don't actually preclude anyone else from using it. And I think coexistence is a big question. So in Wi-Fi, you switch on, you try and avoid all the channels that are in use. With Whitespace, I suspect you'll do the same. First of all, you've got to completely avoid the TV channels, but then you've got to also avoid other people using those channels. But at some point, we're going to have to work out a way of running two channels together, two people using the same channel, like you do with Wi-Fi. So just to give you a picture of what the characteristics are of Whitespace, don't get too excited. It's 10 kilometers range, great, but it's 16 megabits per second per channel. Boo. It's not exactly LTE kind of speeds. Partly I think that's down to not being able to use OFDM because of the interference of that. So it has its limitations, but there's possibly a window of opportunity for rural broadband where you really can't get anything to be using this technology in the meantime. That 16 megabits, on the other hand, is ideal for the Internet of Things and machine to machine. So I think it's got a second wind to it that will pick up in a few years' time once people have devices on it. 10 kilometres, that's really handy because it's a good range from a single base station. Fewer base stations, less backhaul, less expense. And the sparsely populated areas won't tax it too much at 16 megs. This is a typical Visio rendering of what Whitespace looks like. Your rural ISP, pretty simple. You have a big antenna on a base station. The base station doesn't need to be anything complicated. It's not as if it's not like a mobile base station. I think, Neil, you'll probably have a picture of the mast at Butte, and it's just a pole with some antennas on it, like a TV antenna, which is helpful when you're actually trying to build a network and you've got to pay Arqiva for what they call aperture space, which is the space on a mast, which inevitably they own. Interestingly, wherever you go, Arqiva owns something that you want to use as a mast, but also they've taken over the part of the Whitespace which is the program making of special events equipment. This radio mic, for instance, uses that part of the spectrum, PMSE it's called, and Arqiva have now taken over the running of the registration system of that. Wherever you go, you'll find they already got there, put their towels down first. Internet of Things. These triangles represent sensors. It's not a very taxing network, I'll say, but machine to machine or Internet of Things, depending on what your political viewpoint is on it. And it's useful for managing devices out of band, perhaps, without a mobile network. So if you're managing the mobile network with Whitespace, it's not a high volume activity. So what can you do? I mean, as in, what can you do? I think the first thing you ought to do is find the white spaces. So this is the Spectrum Bridge UK white spaces page. It's essentially based on the digital television transmission database and the model for propagation of TV signals. This is channel 22, for instance. Notice Cambridge has got a big star on it because that's where everything happens in Whitespace right now. There was a big trial there. There's a lot of involvement from Cambridge and Newel based there. But if I was to start a Whitespace network in Oxford, my Gorilla sensor network, for instance, I'd need to find a free channel and then choose to start using that. Now this process might happen automatically once you've got Whitespace Database up and running. The device, the base station, will check which channel it can use in an area. And in theory, you can bond the channels, so you can double your bandwidth, or increase your bandwidth by 16 megs a go. So this is a kind of theme of the Love Hertz website, is as it's like Wi-Fi, or it looks similar to Wi-Fi. It's unlicensed to a degree. You don't need permission to start using it apart from checking that you're not interfering. I think it's really useful for things like events, a community broadband project. You don't have to pay for any spectrum to make this work. Internet of Things, it's ideal for that. And that brings me to the Gorilla sensor networks. This picture behind is my creation of a flooding sensor network because the Environment Agency only have 4 data points and Oxford is just a swamp in the west when it floods. So a few Whitespace devices there, maybe get someone in their trunks under a bridge and set up a few sensors and put a base station somewhere over there on the right, and you've got yourself a sensor network with no spectrum costs. And you don't have to go out and change the SIMs either. SIM management is a big pain in the neck for M2M. Helpfully, somebody's called it super Wi-Fi in America. It's not super, and it's not really Wi-Fi, so it's not very helpful. It helps to get the idea across that it's wireless and it's longer, but that's where the similarity ends. There are 802.11 protocols that will help you to do Wi-Fi-like things. At the moment, the protocols, they're still up in the air. It'll be interesting to see what you can do, but this is the spectrum part of it, that it will be opened up to allow this to happen. Events, by the way, electromagnetic wave, NAT wave. Are you selling tickets for electromagnetic wave? Jasper is selling tickets over here. We hope to have a small event, we're going to have a small event on a boat in Docklands, and we hope to have a Whitespace license for that and do a Whitespace trial, which will probably be one of the first trials outside of a commercial arrangement. But we'll see if Ofcom will give us the license, because the O2 centre is just across the river, and of course there's an awful lot of radio mics over there. How would you do it? Is that right? Yeah. There's a CPE. This is the Newel CPE. This is for outdoors. This is for the American market, where someone different comes and nails it to the outside of your house, and someone inside attaches it to your broadband router. It's hardened. It needs a TV antenna on the outside. It's ready to go. So it's actually quite handy to actually have a product to show you. I learnt yesterday Motorola Cambium and Canopy system will be doing Whitespace, I think, by next year. So some of the vendors are looking at it. It may not be as popular, and there might not be as many vendors behind it, so the price might stay high. That remains to be seen. Base stations, I think, will come down in size from 3U to something more manageable. And this is the alternative. If you want that chip which Steve showed us earlier, the Iceni chip, if you can imagine, because I haven't got one to show you, but if you can imagine one on this board here, it would be about the size of a Bluetooth chip. The Raspberry Pi is complete overkill for it. You could run it on a battery for, 10 years they claim? 10-kilometre range, millions of devices. And that is huge compared to how you could actually run it. So it's particularly exciting for machine to machine. When can you start? Well, the Ofcom licensing thing is open at the moment. The statutory instrument hasn't been created, if that's the right word. 2013 estimated. It could be as soon as April, it could be the end of the year. But at the moment you can get a trial license, a non-commercial trial license, and actually try it out. We'll let you know how well that goes if we get one, which is part of the process as well. So the vendors are doing things now. We've got trials that have been completed in the UK. There's trials happening in Singapore. Trials have happened in Singapore. They're happening in Ireland. They're happening everywhere except Germany, really. I say everywhere. A lot of places are happening, but you wouldn't expect it not to be happening in Germany. I think that's because of this 700 megahertz refarming by 2018 to harmonise the 700 megahertz band so that everyone can use it for LTE, or wireless broadband as it's called. But getting rid of that 700 megahertz band would probably cause a real crunch in the available white spaces. The EU are heading in that direction. The US have already made white spaces available. We are likely to make white spaces available. The rest of the world are looking at white spaces. The EU are going, maybe not. We'll look at it, but so far we think we're going to just refarm it all. I think that's enough of my wittering, so it's probably time for some questions. Jasper, any microphone?
Hi there, my name is Jasper Wallace from EMF Camp. I was just wondering, how easy is it to get hold of like a dev kit for the iCini chips?
At the moment, it's a lot like Bluetooth in that it's a licensed. Is it licensed? It's an open standard. You have to pay to join, so it's not open. There's a special interest group called the Weightless SIG, and Weightless is the protocol they've developed. If you pay £600, you can become a member and you can get the spec. That means you're likely to be able to get the dev boards.
It's free to join.
It's free to watch,
Yeah.
but it's
You get
not.
the spec, but you can't contribute unless you're a member.
Okay. There are some memberships you can get from just watching to actually participating and changing the spec. I did plead with William Webb from Newel as to whether we could get some boards to test that out, and I think that's unlikely at the moment, so it's probably CPEs only at the moment. Anyone else? Anyone going to use it? Going to go back and try and find out how to use it? No.
Well, that's the next talk. Okay, thank you, Ben.
Thanks.